Major funding for these broadcasts has been provided by grants from New York Community Bank, AmTrust Title Insurance Company, Perfect Building Maintenance, M&T Bank, Customers Bank, Marks Paneth LLP, Ariel Property Advisors, Sterling National Bank, Capital One Bank, Collins Building Services, Meridian Capital Group. Additional support has been provided by grants from AVR Realty Company, Amerant Bank, Bank of America Merrill Lynch, B6 Real Estate Advisors, Briarwood Organization, Chase Commercial Term Lending, Chase Commercial Mortgage, Citizens Bank, CPEX Real Estate Services, Douglaston Development Levine Builders, Flushing Bank, Friedman LLP, Handler Properties LLC, Handler Real Estate, Hodges Ward Elliott INC, Investors Bank, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Center at Syracuse University, Kilroy Architectural Windows, New York's Window Company, Matone Group, New Banks, Newmark Knight Frank, Optimum Window Manufacturing Corp., People's United Bank, Rockefeller Group, Rosewood Realty Services, SJP Properties, Stonehenge NYC, TD Bank, Terra CRG, the Merengoff Family Foundation, and these friends. Stuyvesant Town, East End Temple, Robert Hall, music, Jimmy and the Jelly Beans, Syracuse University, Metropolitan Life Insurance, a lot of places. I have the legendary Jimmy Kuhn, who is the president of Newmark Knight Frank. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
So let's talk about paternal family, how the people came to America. Start from the beginning on your father's side, and then we'll get to your mother's side.
So I always wish I had asked my father more questions. And in fact, my youngest son and I are going to Romania this summer to try to trace our roots. My grandfather and grandmother came over here in 1900, I think they were 15, from Galați in Romania. And they came to this country, moved to Scranton, and then from there moved to Brooklyn, where they had my dad. And my dad grew up in Brooklyn.
He went to Boys High.
Boys High. And then he went into the Air Force.
Right, but he went to Brooklyn College.
He did go to Brooklyn College.
Went to Brooklyn College. He was in the Air Force.
There's a radio operator, B-17.
And then after the war, he even flew for the State of Israel.
It was funny, when my mother died, we were with the rabbi, and we were talking about my father, and my wife said to the rabbi, well, Leo, why don't you tell the rabbi about these secret missions you flew to give arms to Israel? And my father said, well, I don't know if I can talk about that. And my wife said, I think the statute of limitations has run out. So yeah, he did that.
Okay, so that's Pop's side. Tell me about Mom's side.
So Mom grew up in, as far as I know, Scranton, Pennsylvania, also by coincidence. And her grandparents owned a clothing store there. And then I think, after she met my dad, they moved to Stuyvesant Town.
How did your parents meet?
So the story goes, my mother was engaged to one of the owners of A. Saperstein's from the Boston Celtics. That's the story. And my father went up and I guess didn't care. And
hit him in the nose?
The story goes, they got into a little fisticuffs, but in any event, they ended up getting married. So.
Okay, and then they moved to Stuyvesant Town,
Yes.
which was, MetLife had built
Yes. right
after the war
Yes,
over there.
1948.
And predominantly was for military people coming back
It
from...
was for veterans. It was a great place to live. Didn't cost very much to live there. There was no air conditioning.
So let's talk about growing up in Stuytown, okay?
I think the great thing about growing up in Stuyvesant Town was that nobody knew that we didn't have any money. Because you went out in the playground, you played ball, your life was 14th Street to 23rd Street, went to PS 19 on 10th Street and First Avenue. It was predominantly not a white Caucasian school at the time. It's integrated, so from the very early age, there was no stigma to me about that. But in any case, then I went to junior high school 104 on 20th, then Stuyvesant High on 15th Street. So most of my existence was in Stuyvesant Town, going to school, playing ball. And then we talked about the fact when I was 4, I got asthma, and my father would take me to Flushing to a doctor there. We got shots, and then he took me to a double feature cowboy movie.
And you saw a lot of John Wayne.
John Wayne was my hero growing up, leaving politics aside.
Now, one of the jobs that your father had was he worked for a number of movie theaters, and one of them was something called the Jerry Lewis Theaters.
That's right. So he worked for National General Theaters. They went bankrupt. He went for Jerry Lewis, worked for Jerry Lewis. They went bankrupt. But he used to drive me around when he was looking for sites. He was the site locator. And that was sort of my taste of real estate. Although my father, for many, many years, just said to me, you could do anything you want in your life, but don't go into real estate.
When did you get involved with the piano?
I used to pick it up by ear when I was 8. I tried to take classical lessons. I lasted about a year. It wasn't for me. And then just over my years, I had bands. In high school, we had a band called Jimmy and the Jelly Beans. It's a black and white photo, so it won't show that the entire band was redheads. And I used to be a redhead.
Right.
And after Jimmy and the Jelly Beans, when I went from Stuyvesant to Syracuse, we had a band there for a couple of years. And then I had my career, and 20 years went by, and then we started Square Feet, which was the in-house band. And then the last iteration, of course, is the Square Feet I have today, which is all professional musicians, 30-year-old, great, fabulous, terrific singers and musicians. And we play all over. We play casinos, we play in the bars. We're playing tomorrow night at the Red Lion. It's great.
Let's talk about the unique jobs that you had growing up when you were living in Stuytown. The butcher shop.
So, when you're growing up, you don't think they're unique, right? You need to get a job to have spending money to help pay college, whatever it is. So you go ask around. And so one of my friends' father owned a butcher shop, and they said, can you drive a panel truck to the slaughterhouse, pick up the animals, they hang them in the truck, bring them back, clean them in the butcher shop. One year I worked for Robert Hall in the factory after school, packing boxes. I bussed tables. I was a waiter. Worked in the poverty program down in Tompkins Square until they shot a few policemen, and that was the end of that.
Yeah, Mom and Dad said it's a little dangerous.
A little dangerous. But we did what we had to do.
Now, how'd you get involved with fencing?
So I was a 8.5-inch basketball player in middle school that was never going to go anywhere in that sport, especially in New York City, where it was certainly competitive. And we had the best #1 high school fencing team anywhere on the planet. We had an affiliation with the New York Athletic Club, and our fencers used to go there. So I said, okay, where can I be the best? So I started taking lessons at the New York Athletic Club, and then went out for the team, and then eventually, became pretty good.
I know that you had this proximity that you could go from 14th Street to 23rd Street. Is that why you went to Stuyvesant High School?
Well, I think in those days, there were 3 high schools that you could take a test to get in, Stuyvesant, Brooklyn Tech, and Bronx Science, and it was literally across the street. So that might have been even more important than the academic part, but it was a great school, and it wasn't really much of a decision.
So you graduated Stuyvesant. How did you decide to go to Syracuse?
So my father said you should go to Brooklyn College, which was free, or Buffalo, which was almost free. And my mother said, nope. She had spent a lot of her life in Schenectady after Scranton. She said, go to Syracuse. And they offered me a half fencing scholarship, about a quarter loan, and about a quarter jobs. So as long as I could pay for the majority of it. And I started out, I worked in the cafeteria in one of the girls' dormitories. I worked at the control desk at the dormitories, the front desk where they, in those days you couldn't just go up in the dorms. There were curfews and everything. So I worked there. And I worked delivering pizzas for Cosmos Pizza on Sundays because there was no meal service on Sundays. So I continued just to work, to have money.
Now, why aerospace?
I don't really have a clue. I think at the time, the United States was very big in the space program, and Syracuse had a dual math aerospace engineering program, 5-year program, and my father said, you should do that. You're a good math student, and you'll have a specialty, and you'll work 30 years and get a pension, and you'll retire, and it'll be great. And you know, it was not an easy curriculum, and between the fraternity and the fencing, something had to give, and so it wasn't going to be fraternity or fencing.
So 2 years into it or 3 years?
3 years into it,
You
I switched to
decide
business.
Right.
Took another 2 years to finish business, got an MBA, begged the dean to let me stay, and then got one job offer when I left to go to work for Metropolitan.
Okay, so you graduated what year?
74.
So it's 1974. We're in another recession at that time. How'd you get an opportunity to get to work for MetLife?
You know, I think most aggressive entrepreneurial graduates would not have really particularly wanted to go to work for an institution as bureaucratic as an insurance company in those days. So my father knew somebody who knew somebody, and they were interviewing people. It wasn't really that hard to get the job. They were paying everybody $12,000 a year, and to me, it was a ton of money. I went and got a studio apartment for $200 a month.
You left Stuytown?
I left Stuytown. I actually took a studio apartment a block away from Stuytown, and I bought my suits at Buyers Factory Outlet for $39, and truthfully, I had a lot of money. I mean, I didn't need anything.
So what happens at MetLife? Okay, it's
So
the recession.
recession.
Real estate world is in trouble. Right. There's a couple of things happening.
So most of the best employees went to other parts of the country. Was regionalizing. Some went to Atlanta, some went to Chicago, some went to LA. I wasn't leaving New York. So I got to try and foreclose on New York City, some of the best landlords in America. And it was a workout period. And I will tell you, it's where I learned the business. When things are great, nobody learns the business. You just check the boxes, you make the loans. But when things are tough and you're working it out, I think I try to foreclose on both my late partner, Bernie Mendick, and Larry Silverstein, Harry Helmsley. So
let's talk about the Harry Helmsley and Bernie Mendick story, because that was one of the interesting career moves and on two very dynamic individuals. Tell me about that.
So very early on, I was a kid. I was 23, 24 years old, and you know, Harry Helmsley and Larry Wien and MetLife owned One Penn Plaza, and look, nobody could really find tenants, and so they came in and they said, you know, we need to have interest eliminated and amortization eliminated because we can't pay you. And I don't know what possessed me to say to Harry Helmsley, well, if you can't pay us, we're going to take the building back. And of course, the head of MetLife at the time, Bill Leahy, and John Creedon wasn't having any of that. So that didn't happen. And then later on, Bernie and Larry owned 801 Second Avenue, and they were having trouble, and we talked about foreclosing, and I got to know Bernie and Larry both, and then they split up, and Bernie asked me to join
So
him.
you're at Met for what, about 5 years? Okay, and then at this time, Bernie was an entrepreneur breaking up from his brother-in-law,
Yes.
Larry Silverstein, and you had, what, 2 employees in the two of you?
So we had 2 employees, Bernie and I, and Bernie was in the process of buying 866 UM Plaza for a couple $1 million.
Right, 866 UM Plaza was a unique building. It was an IM Pie building where condominiums were on one side, and on the first 8 floors,
6 floors.
6 floors, there was an office.
Yeah, Alcoa owned it. Didn't divesting of real estate. It was an interesting building because it was UN missions even then, but it wasn't that well occupied. And so we were buying that, and then, you know, I always wanted my father to have something secure, and so I said to Bernie, well, let's hire my father to be the building manager, run the building. And we did that, and he ran the building for the rest of his life until my mother got sick, and then eventually he passed away. But it was one of the things, you know, when you talk about mentorships and how you feel like people made your career, what was more important to me about Bernie was that he gave my father a home for 17 years. So that was really important for me.
So 866 is the first building. Then what happens in the second
So
one?
then Jerry Spire and Bernie were pretty friendly. Jerry comes to Bernie and says, I have a 15% ownership with Gulf and Weston and Two Penn Plaza. I'll offer to sell it to you. We bought the building from Gulf and Weston. I think at the time it was $37 a foot. And we bought Two Penn, and then we bought 330 Madison. It had been foreclosed on by Manufacturers Hanover. They actually foreclosed on the Catholic Church. And we had this access to Chase Bank's trust department, which was, we found out later, Kuwait Investment Authority, Abu Dhabi Investment Authority. So they became our partners. And we were one of the few firms that had money. So we could literally buy anything that we could. And because I was a young kid and I had no baggage in my head, I just thought that everything was cheap. Turned out I was right, but not because I was a genius, just because it was true. And so we ended up buying over the next 15 years about 11 million square feet.
So it's 1990. Bernie had decided really not to be more buying at
Well,
this
you know,
time.
we were starting a recession. We had bought MacArthur Foundation portfolio for about $750 million. We did a great job of converting.
That was Lincoln Towers.
With Lincoln Towers, with Marty Raines. And Bernie was done. At the end of 1992, our real estate was underwater, and I felt I needed to do something for my family. We just had my third kid, and so I had talked to Barry, and Barry and I were both members of the Young Men's Now and Women's Real Estate Association, and we knew each other from then. And Barry sort of asked me one day, what do you want to do? I said, well, eventually I think I'll go back and run a company. He goes, come run our company. And so I went there.
So what was Newmark at that time?
So Newmark was, for the
It was
most...
founded by Aaron Garal.
So founded by Aaron Garal. Barry and Jeff went into the business in 1978. From 1978 to 1990, they bought about 8 million feet of office space, old loft buildings. They didn't have institutional partners. They were friends and family, which turned out to be great because they kept all their real estate, and of course now it's worth a fortune. And so Barry in 1990 said to Jeff, I'm done. Market stinks. I'd like to start a brokerage company. Jeff said, you're out of your mind. He said, I'll run the real estate. You build the brokerage company. So we started the company and building it. From where
How
Barry...
many people did Newmark have at this time?
I'm going to guess 50. And Barry had started to build the brokerage. He had some brokers from Helmsley Spear and Edward S. Gordon, and Barry had started to build it. And at the time, they thought of me as sort of the institutional guy, which is a little bit comical to me. But relatively speaking, coming out of where I came out of, they felt that I was institutional. Had a lot of institutional partners with Bernie, Equitable, Bear Stearns, et cetera, Allen and Company.
Now, how did you get involved with the MTA on two occasions? Because one was the Coliseum site where the Time Warner Center is, which is going to be called the Deutsche Bank Center shortly.
Right, sure.
And then the Hudson Yards.
When Ann Weisbrod became head of the Hudson Yards Development Corp., the original vision was for the Jet Stadium. And so they had hired me to be their consultant. Nobody would write the opinion letter that the Jet should go there, so they made me sort of sign this letter that said, we agree that the Jet should go to the West Side. Didn't happen. But then they formed this Hudson Yards Development Corp., and I had the great fortune to work with Dan Doctoroff for 4 years, and Ann Weisbrod, with Jen and David in my office, and we created the RFP, and we built the stakeholders and talked about, believe it or not, the developers were giving us feedback that they wanted to tear the High Line down at first. And so it was a long process, and it was a great process. And Dan was really smart enough to figure out that we got to get this done before we go into a recession. If you remember the early part of this, Jerry Spire was going to do it, Merrill Lynch and Lehman Brothers had issues. And so, but look, Related did such an unbelievable job. I'm not sure there was another firm on the planet that could have done what they did.
Right, but that was part of it. But the transferable air rights was a very important portion of that.
Well,
because that helped the community.
Look, we spent a lot of time negotiating with the railroad because they were going to have to take tracks out while we built, and we had to negotiate how many tracks we could take out at one time. It was a very complicated but phenomenally interesting and successful project.
So let's talk about something called Bethlehem Steel.
So an attorney named Mike Perucci in Pennsylvania, he and Rick Fishbein, who was a friend of Barry's, came to us and said, we can buy the Bethlehem Steel plant for $3.5 million. And honestly, we had no idea what we could do with it. Had some interesting buildings. it had been remediated by the federal government, but we thought we could melt the steel down and break even. And there was one building there we liked, so we decided to do it. About a year and a half later, much to our surprise, Pennsylvania passes gaming.
So originally, when you bought it, there was no plans.
Not even a glimmer of our eye.
Idea
Not
of gaming.
any.
It was really the steel to burn it down.
These are one of these things where we were lucky. I mean, that was luck, right? But they talk about all the famous expressions about luck. But the bottom line was Barry found Las Vegas Sands, and we negotiated an EBITDA deal. It became a huge success. #1 casino in Pennsylvania. It was really Barry's sort of creation, I think.
When we talk about Barry and Jeff, I mean, Jeff has gone into also the track business and gambling business and other aspects. Let's talk about how the Newmark and what has happened to Newmark over the years, with the public company and so on.
So, Barry and I built the company for 20 plus years, but Barry had known Howard from sitting on one of his boards.
Howard Lutnick.
Ed Lutnick. In 2011, we had come through a very tough 2009 where the company, if you remember, nobody was making money the first 6 months of 2009, and Barry, Jeff, and I decided to sort of not take any compensation that year and try to keep the company running so we wouldn't have to fire anybody. And so some of our senior brokers chipped in, and basically it just became obvious to us that we couldn't compete if we didn't have capital, and we didn't want to sell to another brokerage firm. We didn't want to do a private equity deal because then you're for sale again 5 years later. So we did this deal with Howard, and I didn't know Howard, and I didn't know how it was going to turn out, but it's been tremendous. He gave us all the resources and more than he said he would. He trusts Barry 100%, and we built the company up. We're over a $2 billion market cap today.
So when did you go public?
Last year in December.
Right, and that's the pictures we have of NASDAQ.
Yes, right.
Let's talk about the band. You say today you still have the band.
So the band is one of my favorite things in my life next to my 3 kids. We started a company band in the 90s, and it was fun. We played at the Christmas party. People used to throw stuff at us, and they loved us. But eventually, I met this amazing group of musicians. They're in their early 30s, and music is just a passion. And when I'm performing, it's like I believe for like 3 hours I'm a rock star, and the people become my friends. We play all over. We play as north as Turning Star Casino in Syracuse. We play the Red Lion in the Village, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful thing.
Let's talk about how you met your wife. You were teaching at NYU? Yeah,
it's a great story, and you can imagine it's been embellished as it's gone on through the years. But so she was a kid. She's a 22-year-old kid, and she was taking a real estate course at NYU, and it's an executive education. She was in my class, but I didn't really know her. And my brother was in the class. A lot of people were taking it for credit. And but the next semester, she took Bernie's course, and we sort of met. And it was sort of, love at first sight. And we got married 2 years later. And
let's talk about the 3 children.
3 great kids. Joey's my oldest son. I think he knew from the minute he could speak that he was going to be in the entertainment business. He could have been an investment banker, could have been a musician or an artist, but he wanted to be a filmmaker. He just signed with CAA. He moved to LA. He's going to make his second feature film about Miami in the 70s. And actually, my late mother-in-law is sort of a character. So Joey and I went to Brown and then NYU Tisch. But Carly went to Syracuse, to Newhouse. She wanted to be in the TV business. She went to work for CAA in LA right out of school. She had enough of the snow. She moved out there 10 years ago. Then worked for Chelsea Lately Show as associate producer. But then she had this talent that I don't think I really saw early on. I'm sure she had it. And she's an illustrator, and she has a huge following on Instagram, and she's now licensing her drawings to do wallpaper. And my baby went to Duke. He was a fencer like I was. He was actually nationally ranked, and he was recruited by a lot of schools, but he went to Duke. And then when he came out of Duke, he went into the music business, but he didn't think it was a great business. So he came to me and he said, let's go into esports business. And so about 3.5 years ago, we bought like a minor league team, you would call it. And then the league went to a franchise, bought us out. We merged with a company down in Florida with the Miami Heat. We bought a second team in the European League of Legends team, and so Jake now has moved from New York to L.A. to Berlin, and he runs events in Berlin.
Okay. In addition, you've given back. You created the James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute of Syracuse. You're the chairman of the board of the Shack Real Estate Institute at NYU. You're chairman of the board of the West Hampton Arts Center. You've been involved and you've always given back to numerous charitable things. And
look, I've had a blessed life. I have 3 healthy kids. I have a great family. And I've always felt that there's 2 things you can do that's from here. One is you want your kids to be better than you are, and of course healthy. And then you want to give back, because that's what should give you the feeling that you've done something important that's unrequited. And I have somebody in my office who always teases me, calls me a 501c3 because I help brokers, I give them money, whatever. But I just think that, you go through life and you're not doing things for somebody without expecting anything in return. It's just it's an empty life. So it is what it is.
thanks for being here today.
My pleasure.